Tiger fans, welcome to another episode of Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club. I am the Corey C. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You don't want to miss out on a single episode. We have a lot of new shows coming up with football season in full swing now. So you want to make sure you're right there to get that notification. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on the Apple Podcast app, the Google Podcast app, Spotify. Just Google Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club and you'll find us. So be sure to follow the show and tell every Tiger that you know. And remember, when you support Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club, it all helps the cause, which is the I Love Jackson State University. And of course, today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online, your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. Bet Online continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games, available to play right from your phone. So head on over to the website or use your mobile device and sign up to get in on the action. Be sure to use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. All right, and we're here already. I know it's still early in the season. We're still in September. We're already talking Boombox Classic. That's usually a little bit later on in the year, but we're getting at those Jags already. And back again to talk about the team is an award-winning freelance writer who covers Southern Jaguars for The Advocate and Baton Rouge, none other than Mr. Jim Kleinpeter. Welcome back to the show.
Glad to be on. Thank you for having me.
All right, how's everything going?
It's we all love football season. And the hardest week is that last week before it starts. It seems like it takes forever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. We're here, obviously, the football season. But as I mentioned already, Jackson State and Southern a little bit earlier than we're normally used to it. But hey, we had to make sure that this game took place, obviously, with the additions to the SWAC. We can't play everybody every year. So when we look at that schedule, and it's a year that when the game doesn't count in the standings, we still want to play Southern. So definitely looking forward to that. But let's talk about the opening game for Southern. Obviously, Jackson State has already played twice, but Southern opened up last week against Bama State, a game that I think many people probably expected them to win, but came up short 14-10, and they were scoreless in the second half. 5 turnovers, and I think the most costly turnover was in the third quarter. They were up 10-7, and your quarterback, Mr. Blood, was strip sacked deep in Bama State territory and led to the go-ahead touchdown. So a devastating loss. So you can kind of give us a recap of that one.
Yeah, the big question was Harold Blood. This is their third new starting quarterback in the third in 3 years, and everybody was wondering. He's a guy that's been on the team. This is his 5th year in the program, and he just never really got any major action. He got into a couple of games late when they were already decided, but he really started out pretty well, a 77-yard drive, 14 plays for a touchdown. He threw for 95 yards on his first 2 drives, but he only threw for 71 after that. So, yeah, it was they were hoping for better, and it wasn't all his fault. He threw a couple of interceptions, had the fumble. It wasn't all his fault. The Jaguars made mistakes, a couple of holding penalties along with the turnovers. And they were in the game. They were 1 play from taking the lead the whole game, and just could not get anything going offensively from the second quarter on.
Right. And you mentioned it not being his fault, a couple of those turnovers. And that's the thing. When you look at the box score and you don't see the game, it may not tell you exactly how the game went. So, we see 17 for 34, 166. We see the touchdown, but we see the 3 turnovers, and it appears that he struggled. Coach Dooley, he kind of downplayed the idea of making a quarterback change. So how would you say Blood's debut went relative to the expectations going in?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. I mean, the fans, it wasn't good enough, but Dooley, and I think he's right. You got to be fair to the kid. It wasn't all his fault. Now he threw 2 interceptions, and they pretty much, I think, were his fault. He made some throws where he was late with the ball, and there was one throw that looked like it was going to be a touchdown, but he hesitated and made the throw, and then the defensive back was able to get there in time to knock it down, or it would have been a touchdown, if the wide receiver catches it. So I thought he looked good. His poise looks good. He didn't make a lot of mistakes in the pocket. I didn't think he ran when he needed to. He was their most effective runner because the other backs the running backs averaged 2.7 yards. I think he played well enough for them to win. they like I said, they were one play from taking the lead, and they just really never got closer than the 41-yard line of Alabama State after the second quarter.
You mentioned the offense having some success early, but pretty much being bogged down for the rest of the game. And then you talked about the running backs as well. I know they struggled to get it going, both Kobe Dillon and Gary Quarles, who, interestingly enough, he's the former all-SWAC running back from Alabama State, who's now at Southern, but only 69 yards rushing as a team. And I know they lost their 3 leading rushers from last season. So talk a little bit about that run game. Is there a guy who they expect to step up this season?
Well, they've got let's go to the offensive line first. And the offensive line is kind of a question mark too. So you're not going to run the ball if you don't have a good offensive line. And they have four guys that have started back on the offensive line. Now that's good, but I'm not talking about 4 guys that started 10 games. I'm talking about 4 guys that had some starts. So okay. I think the offensive line had some struggles and had a hand in the low rushing numbers. The backs are good. Quarles is a good back. I mean, he's a proven back. Kobe Dillon's a proven back. He's coming off having missed all of last year with a knee injury. And he's kind of a power back, and he's a guy that they need. And then Kendrick Rhymes is a Mississippi guy who really was their best. He was their best back toward the end of last year, and a very capable back. So they've got the talent there, and they've got some guys behind those guys too. But I think maybe there's a little bit of a problem with the offensive line. They're not quite there yet, and they committed a couple of bad holding penalties, 2 holding penalties that killed 2 drives. When you get 2nd and 20, it's you're probably going to be punting in a couple of downs. So that they've got to work on that and get the offensive line going to get the running game going.
With an offensive line like that, kind of what you described, I know that's new to Southern fans. I know, facing that team each year, that's one thing that it is, especially if we go back a couple of years ago, Coach Dawson Moldham, that's one thing that he really, really focused on and prioritized, is having a bunch of guys up front, big guys, and being able to rotate them out and having some depth. So I know that's something new for Southern, kind of seeing the offensive line struggle. But if you look at the passing game as well, we're going back to Blood, only 17 completions. But the thing that I noticed that he really spread the ball out amongst 10 different receivers and backs, and no one caught more than 3 balls. So are there any guys who you can see or are expected to maybe emerge from the pack throughout the season, or can we just look to see him spread it around that much? Because that's different. You don't see that often.
Yeah, Eric Dooley, he brought in a couple of guys that he had at Prairie View, and those 2 were in the starting lineup, and that's Jalen Howard, who I think is a guy that he wants to stretch the field. In fact, the first play of the game, Harold Blood's first pass was a bomb that he overthrew. Howard was open by a couple of steps, but he overthrew him. But I think that was kind of to set the tone, let the defense know that they were going to attack vertically. And Jalen Howard's a guy and then there's Colby Washington. He caught a couple of passes. They brought in a guy named George Qualls, not Quarles, but Qualls, without the R. And he made some nice catches. There's probably some chemistry things about, getting everybody lined up, but he threw to the backs, and Dooley likes his backs to catch passes, and all 3 of the running backs are good athletes and good receivers. So I think as we go along, we're going to see some more. I think we're going to see a better chemistry between the quarterback and his receivers, and you're going to see some passes to the running backs, just taking the safe play and taking, a 5 or 6 yard gain instead of, gunning for 20 yards.
Right. And with that offense being stagnant for the large majority of the game, and as you look at the upcoming game with Jackson State, a team who, despite last week, can put up some points on offense. Some things last week they set them back in terms of costly mistakes that they made offensively, and then obviously a stout defense as well. So Southern will need to put up some points to stay in this game. So who are the guys who need to step up on offense for Southern?
Along with the offensive line, Harold Blood's got to show some improvement. I mean, he didn't, like I said, I don't blame everything on him, but he was, quarterbacks have all the power to make a play. Okay. And at some point he did okay, but he's got to step up. And I think the receivers have to get open. This is what the Southern struggled with last year. Their receivers had trouble getting open, and I think Dooley has a lot of his receivers back from last year, but he went out and got some more, and he's trying to tell them, look, if you're not gonna run your route and get open, we'll find somebody that will. So they need for Howard to step up. They need for Qualls to step up, and Cassius Allen, who is their top receiver from last year. He had a couple of targets. They didn't throw to him too much, but he's a guy he's a big 220-pound receiver who you can just throw the ball up to him, and he's probably going to outfight somebody for it. But the backs need to step up too. They need to, but I think that everything will be better for Southern if the offensive line plays better.
Mm-hmm. Yep. How frustrating was this loss from a defensive standpoint? I mean, Southern only gave up 2 touchdowns. And one was on a short field with only, I think it was a 17-yard drive or so after a turnover. They held Bama State to under 90 yards rushing, 2.3 yards per carry. You mentioned Southern struggling rushing the football, but so did Bama State, and even under 100 yards passing. So if you had told me, and we talked about looking at the game versus looking at the box score, but if you had told me that and I didn't see the score, I would bet that Southern won the game. So let's talk about from a defensive standpoint, the mindset now.
Well, the defense played well enough to win on about 90% of the games. They were really good. They stopped every time Southern turned it over or gave up the ball deep in their territory. The defense came up with the stop, except that one time when the Hornets had the ball on the 17-yard line to start the drive. You just can't expect too much more out of them. They did struggle a little bit in the first half because, and I don't know if Alabama's going to play like this all year, but they really played a close to the vest conservative type of game. They used a bunch formation, with the triangle of players, and they would move them around. They would flip-flop offensive linemen and go with an unbalanced line. Southern had a little trouble adjusting to that. And what happened in the first half is, even though Southern played well on offense, they only had 3 drives in the first half, and mainly that was because Alabama State controlled the ball. They would run 2 plays, and then they'd pick up the third downs. And it was with that shifting, it confused Southern a little bit, and they finally got a handle on it in the second half. But so I think the defense played heroically for Southern. They kept them in the game, and there's really nothing for that defense to be down about, other than not being able to hold off that go-ahead touchdown.
Right. And one of the huge bright spots on the defense that played so well was the preseason All-SWAC linebacker, Jalen Campbell. He led the team in tackles last season, and he picked up right where he left off this past Saturday, 15 tackles and a sack. So who are some guys in the defense overall that, if you're a Jackson State fan, you can expect to hear their name being called a lot on Saturday?
Definitely Jalen Campbell. That guy is a tackling machine. He piles them up. He gets to the ball. He's a good pass rusher. I mean, you see these guys miss the quarterback. Sometimes they get back there and they miss the quarterback, and he's a sure tackler. The 2 guys that need to play well for Southern are Rashid Lyles and Davin Cotton. They're the defensive tackles. And Rashid Lyles is a Louisiana Tech transfer who actually played pretty well for Tech last year. He had some decent numbers. He was in the rotation. I don't think he was a starter. And then Davin Cotton is an LSU transfer from about 4 years ago who he was a starter 2 years ago, and he got hurt and missed all of last season. He had to have reconstructive knee surgery. If he plays well, you'll hear his name. He's quick. He's not a the big run stopper, but he's a guy that'll get penetration for you. And then Kelby Givens, their defensive end, is a very good player. He's a freshman last year. If the SWAC had picked an all freshman team, he'd have been on it. And he was a force defensive. And Southern has their 2 cornerbacks back from last year. So they've got a good setup in the secondary, 3 starters overall. And they made some moves back there with some they shuffled some players around. But I think when you have their secondary, when you have your starting corners back, and they're long, they're both 6'2", Kristen Davis and Rodney Johnson. So they did a good job too, and they just couldn't. You stop the little dump offs over the middle. That's what killed them the most in trying to stop those Alabama State drives.
Right. And talk about Coach Dooley. I know he mentioned throughout the week needing to move on from what he called a very, very, he emphasized very disappointing loss quickly with Jackson State looming. So just talk about his mindset and maybe his message for the team.
Well, he came to Southern. He's kind of viewed as the guy who's going to get Southern back to the Pete Richardson days. He coached under Pete for 13 or 14 years at Southern. He knows what it means. He gets a lot of his attitudes and philosophy from Coach Richardson, and who's beloved, and so I know he feels, he's probably a little embarrassed about how bad his offense was last year, because that's his calling card. He's his own offensive coordinator. He doesn't have an offensive coordinator. I think one of the things he did, and I think it just shows that he's not above holding himself accountable. He went out and got Willie Totten to come and coach the quarterbacks as quarterback, not as offensive coordinator, but as a quarterbacks coach. And there's a name that resonates. So I think he's hoping that, the blood will develop better under Willie Totten and quickly, because, this is a tough matchup. I mean, Jackson State in the second game, sometimes you slip in some of the Division II opponents, but no, I mean, they're going against two really good defenses with a first-time starting quarterback. So Dooley he's kind of, the Southern fans are already restless. I can tell you my inbox is full of their restlessness. So they want some offense, at just a little bit more offense. Last week would have gotten them a victory, and all they got out of it was a touchdown and a field goal, and that's just not enough. And Dooley knows that better than anybody.
So if you had to guess what he's placed the most emphasis on this week in terms of things that need to be cleaned up, what would that be? The offensive line is just, what would you say?
Probably the offensive line. They were a highly penalized team last year. They only had 6 in this game, but they had only 1 in the first half, and it was a delay of game that didn't hurt them. It's those 2 holding penalties that are sticking in his craw, I think, a little bit. And I even asked him, I said, did you, we all know you can call, referees can call holding on just about any play. And if you watch the game closely, you see it, but I asked him if he thought those were good calls. And he said, I think I got the impression that he thought one of them was very questionable, and it really hurt them. It wiped out a big gain and wiped out a first down and set them back, not only. So, I think he wants them to stop making so many mistakes. And when you talk about the interceptions, he didn't say it was the receiver's fault, but there were a couple of plays where, it might have been the receivers may have been at fault for an incompletion or an interception. So I think that's what he's looking for. And Blood has to be better too. He was good, but he was okay in some spots, but he's got to be a little bit, he's got to be above average, not mediocre.
Absolutely. So what would you say is the outlook for the rest of the season? I mean, despite the underwhelming performance, his team was picked to finish first in the SWAC West, and there's obviously some talent on the roster. 9 players selected for the preseason All-SWAC team. They had 3 on the first team, 6 on the second team. So getting back to that SWAC championship game still has to be the goal and expectation, right?
Absolutely. I think I don't think the West Division has a clear leader. You got. I thought Texas Southern was going to be the dark horse, and they're already down 1 because I thought they had the best quarterback. For Southern, it's going to depend on how quickly a Blood can pull it together and become a force in the game, because Dooley wants to throw the ball, so his quarterback has to play well. He's got to play well every game. They can't afford an off game from the quarterback, so they've got to get Blood playing at a higher level. And I give him the first game. That was his first start. I'm sure he was nervous, but when you put so much emphasis on the passing game, you're asking your quarterback to go out there and win games for you. And he didn't have a quick hook last year. In fact, I thought a lot of people agree with me that he should have made a change 3 or 4 games earlier than what he did. So I don't know. We'll see. I think he's confident in Blood, but I know that the kid behind Blood can do the job. He's a very talented transfer from Grambling, who comes from up north, named Noah Bodden. He was, I think, a 3-star recruit coming out of high school. So this is a guy that can play.
Gotcha. So before I let you go, I want to get some quick thoughts on this Jackson State team. I know you don't cover this team, but, being around the SWAC, it's SWAC Media Day, and just a guy who's around the conference. What are your thoughts, especially coming from what we had last season, a huge transition, a roster almost overhaul, still high expectations, started with the bang and kind of hit a roadblock in week 2. So what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I see. It looks like he's got a couple of quarterbacks that can play. It looks like they want to go with the drop back quarterback, Brown. Jason, is that correct?
Jason Brown.
He's kind of a drop back guy. He's not as much of a runner as the other guys. So
Zion McDonald.
Yeah, it looks like they want to go that route, but the thing Jackson State has that I like is they've got a solid running game, and they ran the ball. I thought they ran the ball pretty well on Florida A&M. If you look at the box score, you'll see, some sack yardage and then a 27-yard loss. Probably looks like some kind of a messed up play, and but the Mulligan looks like a solid back. He's a hefty guy. Looks like a power guy that can take the ball, a lot of carries, and I mean, if you've got that's a good that bodes well for balance on offense if you can get your passing game going. So I can see Jackson State is not going to be, they're not going to be throwing for 500 yards a game like they did with Shedeur Sanders. So, but it looks like they've got a pretty good all around, and it didn't look like they really got dominated as much as it first looked like.
When
you look behind the stats, I think you'll see that they played much better in the second half.
Definitely.
But you can't get down 28-0. You're probably not going to win no matter what you do in the second half. So that hurt, and maybe there was some complacency. Coach Taylor talked about how he was very disappointed that his team, the way they responded, and maybe winning that first game, they thought it was still 2022 and 2021. And maybe, even though there's a lot of new players, the attitude, they maybe got a little bit of a wake up call.
Absolutely. Well, if there was some complacency, I don't see that happening this weekend. That's for either team. I mean, this could, especially, both teams coming off losses. Southern coming off 3 straight losses to Jackson State. I know that's a no-go in Baton Rouge. So this could be a memorable one, especially when you factor in the atmosphere. I mean, one of the best in college football, another sellout, and you just never know what to expect when these two teams get together.
Yeah, one of the biggest surprises to me was it was 2 years ago. Southern had they held homecoming, and they had about 23,000. But when Jackson State came to town, they topped that. They had 25,000 plus, and it was just as hard getting to the stadium that day as it was for homecoming. Which to me, Southern's homecoming is like it's just a traffic jam all day. So the stadium is going to be fun. They put in some LED lights. They're going to be able to do the flashing lights and the different colors of lights and bathing the whole stadium. So the atmosphere is going to be crazy. Southern fans are going to be loud because they felt like the one last week is one that got away, and they're hungry. They want to win one.
And you talk about that traffic jam, but we have LSU and Grambling kicking off around the same time, right down the street. So any traffic advice for those of us coming in from out of town? I mean, should we just sleep at the stadium Friday night?
I might have to get a hotel room Friday night and I live in Baton Rouge just to be able to make sure I can get to Southern and beat the traffic. But I'm going to leave super early for that game. I'm going to have to. So, because I live right by LSU and I know how that's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're looking forward to a beautiful weather forecast, 6:00 kickoff on ESPN. Fun fact, 2 former Tigers are on the Southern roster. You mentioned one, Rasheed Lyles. He's a La Tech transfer, but he originally signed with Jackson State. He was in Coach Prime's first recruiting class, and then also Jelani Davis as well, just transferred from Jackson State. So looking forward to that reunion. Looking forward to a fun, exciting rivalry game. So we'll see you there. Get there early.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on.
All right. As always, we appreciate it. Tiger Talk with the 1400 Club is presented by Bet Online.